absolute chaos in there. Last day of the half term, nearly Halloween, just chocolate and madness. So as a treat, we've watched all of Caves of Androzani today. Watched it with the kids, and I mean, let's get this back out of the way. City of Death, as we discussed at the time, is it's definitely the greatest Doctor Who story ever, with the possible exception of this one, and one other perhaps. We'll get to that in due course. This is just unbelievable on a level that Doctor Who rarely transcends to. It is a brilliant drama. I was going to look up what the definition of farce is because I thought that was an interesting place to start, and it feels like a farce. I made that reference to something else before recently. I must work out what that was. But this notion that this Doctor rocks up with Perry in the middle of a situation and is purely by the notion of just being there causes the falling apart of the situation, or even not. Maybe this would have happened anyway. But the Doctor is so not really part of the main story that's such a brilliant idea for Doctor Who, and I think is, in a great many ways, the perfect end for the Fifth Doctor. Let's just quickly go through what's so brilliant about this. Well, everything. The writing is just, welcome back, Robert Holmes. God, you're amazing. Graham Harper's direction. At one point, Liberty Ryan said, has this got a bigger budget? It's like, well, no, it's just what you can do when you turn the lighting down and get some good camera shots. And there's some brilliant stuff going on here in terms of the cinematography. I don't know what the terminology would be. The performances are just unbelievable. And if there was any critique of it, it's fairly one note all the way through. But it deserves to be because it's a regeneration story. To be fair, we've had a number of stories recently that have got that sort of weight behind them. And maybe, especially watching it in this way, cumulatively, that's contributed to a certain extent. But I've always felt that way about Caves of Androzani anyway. So that's absolutely great. Davison's performance here is everything I've wanted Davison to be, I think. And we'll talk more about this in my Ode to Davison, which we will do later. But it's got to be said, I think, that one of the things that gives this story its strength is the fact that Big Finish haven't crammed as many stories as humanly possible and new companions and this, that and the other into the gap between Planet and Fire and Caves of Androzani. Because for this Doctor to regenerate in this way is the most perfect thing. He's only known this girl for 5 minutes. He's formed a bond. But it's just the nobility of it. Anyway, I want to talk more about that in the other video because I think that weighs into that. The cliffhanger, episode 3, as I've already stated, I couldn't resist that, is the best cliffhanger. And it leads into one of the best final episodes for a Doctor, quite frankly. Possibly the best, because it's just so hopeless and yet he succeeds. And that sacrifice he makes is completely in keeping with him as this incarnation of the Doctor. The fact that at the end I feel genuinely sorry for Sharaz Jafar, I genuinely do. I mean, nobody in this story is nice, but my God, what a performance. It's just so nuanced. Nuanced, is it? Maybe it's not. But it just feels so solid. Everything just seems to fit together and make sense. And it's so complicated. Different factions playing off against each other. You know, the reveals come and you just sort of... I've watched it a million times and I had to stop and explain to the kids, to be fair. Now and again, Humphrey will say the win. As you'd expect, he's 9 years old. But this notion of who's in charge here? Well, that's a great question. I think you know when you know. But my God, I can't talk about this enough. And if we compare it to City of Death, which I've previously said is the best, what City of Death has over this is very typified by Tom Baker, isn't it? Which is that sort of ebullience, that sort of cleverness, that sort of university undergrad daft humour, silly bouncing off the walls. I mean, it's just joyous. What does this have? Well, this has a resolute focus, a brilliant script, a brilliant script, but as the City of Death. But tonally, this is utterly driving towards that moment. Everything about this, from the second the TARDIS lands, is almost predetermined, and the whole production feeds into that. The Doctor is absolutely bound to this course of action from the second he sees those tracks and he walks off. And that is just, and it's so powerful, and everything contributes towards that. The music, it's just blissful. I mean, I'm not sure I can say this is the story you give to people from the classic run of Doctor Who to say, this is why you should watch classic Doctor Who. I think it's almost too unrelenting and grim, and that's not really what Doctor Who does. But when it does it this well, I mean, this is just an indication Doctor Who can do anything, can't it? Doctor Who genuinely is the programme that can do anything, and when it's on form, can make it work. And this flipping, almost first Doctor-esque, landing in a situation, getting stranded from the TARDIS, being in a bad groove, having to work your way through. The show doesn't do this very often, but it can't do it very often. I mean, it makes for a very dull programme if every week he lands, the first Doctor, was slightly guilty of that sometimes, you've got to say, when it was a very different sort of programme. But since this has been Doctor Who, since this programme, and I don't know when the tipping point was it the regeneration into Troughton? Was it maybe a little bit later than that? But whenever it was, this programme became Doctor Who, the edifice that is Doctor Who. This type of story has been very few and far on the ground, but my God, what a time to make a re-emergence. So anyway, I'm going to talk more about this in the next thing, because I've got some big thoughts about Davison, and I want to talk about that. I want to think about that. I might even make notes. Jesus. But onwards and upwards, or maybe not. We shall see. This new fella, curly hair, like that. Yeah. Or let's sum it up later. Let's sum up Davison later, because all that has to be said is this. In my Mount Rushmore of Doctor Who stories, classic Doctor Who stories, I think it's fair to say you've got City of Death, Caves of Androzani. There's a space for another one. I don't know what the fourth one would be. We'll talk about that later.